Rocky's fox. It was very late. Rocky had been in bed asleep for a long time, and his mum was also fast asleep. A strange noise came from the garden. What was it? Rocky turned over in bed, wondering what had woken him up. He was just about to settle down and go back to sleep when he heard the noise again. Rocky sat up and listened. It had sounded like a dog barking, but it definitely wasn't Mac. There it was again. This time Rocky jumped out of bed, shivering, as it was quite a cold night. He pulled on his dressing gown and picked up the torch he kept by the side of his bed. Keeping very quiet so as not to disturb his mum, he crept down the stairs. The house was very dark and Rocky was a little frightened. He nearly dropped the torch when he felt something brush against his leg, but he soon realised that it was only Max coming to see him. Max was delighted to have some company so late at night, and he began to bark in excitement. "Shh, Max," said Rocky. Max was immediately quiet as he followed Rocky to the back door. Very carefully, Rocky unlocked the door. It seemed to make a very loud noise in the quiet, dark house. He opened it slowly and peered out into the garden. He couldn't see anything, so he shone his torch up the garden path and moved the light around on the grass and among the bushes. Nothing at all. He was just about to close the door and creep back up the stairs when there was a terrible crash. Rocky jumped and Max scampered indoors in fright. Rocky shone the torch in the direction of the noise and saw that the dustbin had been knocked over. The noise of the dustbin falling had woken Rocky's mum, and very soon she was standing beside him at the back door, peering out in the darkness. "Something's in the garden," said Rocky. "Whatever it is has knocked over the dustbin." Rocky's mum saw the dustbin lying on its side in the light of Rocky's torch. "It must be a dog," she said. "Nothing to worry about. You get back to bed, Rocky. You'll catch your death of cold." Rocky was still sure it was not a dog. "I heard it barking," he told his mum, "but it wasn't like a dog's bark." Just at that moment the noise came again. It was further away this time. Rocky and his mum listened and heard it again. "Dogs don't bark like that," said Rocky. "Maybe not," said his mum, "but there's nothing we can do about it tonight. So I think we'd better go back to bed and get some sleep. You can help me clear up that mess in the morning." Rocky went to bed, but it was a long time before he fell asleep. His last thought was that he would tell Mr. Keeping about what had happened. He knew a lot about animals, so perhaps he would know what had been in the garden so late at night. The next day was Saturday, so after Rocky had cleaned up the mess in the garden, he went over to see Mr. Keeping. He told him all about the strange noise and the rubbish all over the place, and asked him what he thought it might have been. "That'll be a fox," said Mr. Keeping. "Foxes bark like that. Let's go and have a look in the garden and see if we can see any signs." Rocky and Mr. Keeping went into the back garden and looked around. Soon Mr. Keeping was on his hands and knees peering under the shed. Rocky knelt down beside him as Mr. Keeping pointed at the hole. "Look, it is a fox," he said. "A fox lives in that hole under the shed. Let's go a little further away and watch to see if anything else happens. If we're very quiet and still, we might be lucky enough to see a fox." They hid behind a tree to one side of the shed and kept very still and very quiet. Rocky was beginning to get very stiff crouching in one position for so long, and he was just about to stretch when something moved under the shed. Mr. Keeping put his hand on Rocky's arm to warn him to be still. Then a fox came out. The fox sniffed around the shed and then moved a little further away, looking all around, all the time to see if there was any danger. "It's looking for food," whispered Mr. Keeping. The fox moved around for a while longer, then disappeared back under the shed. As Mr. Keeping and Rocky were standing up, they heard someone calling. It was Mr. Crisp, who kept the fish and chip shop next door. "Hello, Rocky! Hello, Mr. Keeping," he said. "Someone is stealing food from my dustbin." Rocky went over to the fence. "It's a fox," he said. "It was in our dustbin last night, and we've just seen it come out from under our shed." "Well, it'll be sorry if it comes back into my garden," said Mr. Crisp, turning away. Rocky wasn't sure what so he watched him over the fence to see what he was going to do. Mr. Crisp began sawing and hammering bits of wood. He made a kind of box with wire netting over the front. He propped the front open with a stick and then put some bits of chicken inside. As Rocky watched Mr. Crisp, he realised what he was doing. He was making a trap to catch the fox. "Oh no," thought Rocky. He had to do something to save the fox from Mr. Crisp's trap. Later that night, Rocky was watching the garden from his bedroom window. As it grew dark, there was movement under the shed, and the fox came out. Rocky knew that he was looking for food again, and he knew that it would not take the fox long to smell the chicken in Mr. Crisp's trap. Rocky was right. The fox circled round the garden a few times with its nose to the ground, and then it leapt over the fence into Mr. Crisp's garden. It moved close to the trap to sniff the chicken. Rocky moved quickly. He ran down the stairs, into the garden, and over the fence. Rocky moved quickly. He ran down the stairs, into the garden, and over to the fence. The fox was very interested in the chicken, and Rocky knew that the front of the trap would crash down as soon as the fox tried to eat the meat. Quickly, Rocky shone his torch right at the fox. It jumped back, startled, and disappeared into the shadows, leaving the chicken untouched and the trap empty. Rocky was very pleased, but he was sure that Mr. Crisp would not feel the same way. The next day, Rocky went back to see Mr. Keeping and told him about the trap. "Mr. Crisp wants to catch my fox," he said. "He's made a trap and he leaves food in it so that the fox will go inside. I chased it away last night before it got caught." Mr. Keeping thought for a moment, and then he said, "Wait here." He went inside his house and returned shortly with a plastic bag with chicken bits in it. "Follow me," he said. Mr. Keeping led the way back to Rocky's garden and over to the shed. He emptied the bag on the ground. "This chicken is for your fox," he said. "This will keep it in your garden. Your fox will be safe there." Just at that moment, Max bounded over to see Rocky. He was very interested in the chicken, and Rocky had to hold him by the collar to stop him from eating it. "No, Max, that chicken is for the fox," he said, and dragged the poor dog back inside. Rocky looked for the fox that night, and he was quite disappointed that he didn't see it. The next day, however, he really had a surprise. He looked in the garden and saw not one, but 4 foxes. The nighttime visitor was a vixen. There she was, a mother fox, with her 3 little cubs. They were all running all over the garden, playing and chasing. Rocky watched them for a long time. Mr. Keeping's plan had worked. The foxes were quite safe in the garden, and as they had found food there, the mother fox had not gone near the trap next door. Later that day, Mr. Crisp saw Rocky in the garden. "Hey, Rocky," he shouted, "come and see. There's something in my trap." Rocky was worried. What if one of the little foxes had got caught in the trap? Quickly, Rocky went round to the garden at the back of the fish and chip shop. Mr. Crisp was bending over and looking into the trap. It wasn't a fox he'd caught, it was Max. "He won't steal from my dustbin again," said Mr. Crisp. "Can I put my trap away?" Rocky didn't say anything. If Mr. Crisp thought Max was the one taking his food, then the foxes would be safe. Anyway, the trap was going to be put away, so Max would be safe too. Rocky put bits of food out for the foxes every day, and they lived quite happily and safely under the shed in his garden.